Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're taking a look ahead to the January transfer window. We're looking at a right back linked with Real Madrid and Liverpool. We're looking at one of Manchester United's summer signings who could already be on the way out. And of course, a Rodri replacement for Manchester City. That's all on today's episode. So we're back for another Monday episode, but a little bit different. We're going to be looking at some transfer rumours today. Isn't that right, Ted Knutson?
I feel like there's like 3,000, 4,000 people that have hopped onto the YouTube subs and they're like, you're named the transfer flow, but you don't talk about transfers. Isn't that a little bit odd? And the reality is we are the meat shields that prevent you from all the terrible transfer rumors during September and October. But now that we're seeing all the leaves fall off the trees, we get a chance to talk about transfers again, which is fun.
I'm kind of pumped for it because we've been in that weird space for a while where there is enough data to talk about teams, and the stories are still emerging. So let's go ahead to transfers and let's jump straight in. You've obviously done a roundup today, so we're going to expand on some of the transfers you looked at in the newsletter. Have a little bit more of a chat. I'm going to tell you how I disagree with you. Let's see.
Excellent. I like it.
Shall we kick off with Joshua Zirkzee? Who,
on a scale of 1 to 10, how hot is Joshua Zirkzee?
That's a really good question. He's tall, which does it for a lot of people. He's strong. He's athletic. He's got good hair. Look, I'll give him like a 6.5. Let's start with that. Okay. And I think that's kind.
This was mentioned because off camera we were talking about all the ridiculous things that we could talk about, and we've really condensed this podcast into like tight and neat stuff for YouTube. But I feel like it's constraining us too much. So like we might expand out a little bit. We might start to add B-roll at the end for people that love listening to us. They can listen to the ridiculous conversations as opposed to just player evaluations over and over again. I'm so excited. I mean, I am excited, but I'm laughing at that. So Zirkzee came through in the summertime, and one of the pieces of analysis that we put together very early on was he's a striker that doesn't seem to score a lot of goals, which doesn't seem to be that valuable for a team like Manchester United. But they also needed warm bodies, and he was available on a release clause from Bologna. His agent was doing a lot of work in order to get him somewhere else, and apparently trying to take a very massive fee because of it, although that was lowered. So the question then becomes, why is he in the news again? And what should we think about him? So first of all, why is he in the news again?
I think we assume because his agent wants to get paid again, right?
This is correct. His agent wants to not ruin his career. He's only 23 years old. And because he's only scored 1 goal so far with Manchester United, you're like, well, maybe this isn't the landing spot for him. Maybe we should bring him somewhere else.
Yeah, but when you look at his numbers, it's not immediate. Okay, look. We had those worries about him in the summer. He's still like a low shot forward. His volume is actually down shots wise, though he's only played about 600 minutes between the league and the Europa League. There's lots of other stuff that's changed as well, but really small sample size. United are a basket case. They're about to change manager. Who knows? Who cares? But I kind of think he's been pretty decent in the minutes that he's had.
He hasn't been terrible.
No.
And he doesn't look completely out of place. Physically, we knew that he'd be fine in the Premier League. The question to me becomes, first of all, like, has he done enough for Amorim to kind of keep him around? And two of the teams that their stats right now are super weird. And if you're judging their attacking players, you're like, I don't really understand this. Manchester United is one of them because they've just been such a weird, chaotic team, and they were playing a very rigid system that didn't seem to fit them so well. So that's one. And that throws Zirkzee's sort of analysis off. But what he's doing isn't bad. And kind of like a little above league average at the moment for United is like fine. Because it could get better, right? So like with a better coach, with a better structure, maybe that gets better. The other team that you have this problem is Arsenal. You're like, wow, now the Arsenal attackers are like look awesome right now. I'm like, that's because they haven't had 11 people on the field all the time, and they've had some issues with injuries and decided to play less attacking football. So between the two of them, when you're judging their attacking players, you need to be conscious that these things are going to sort of constrain them, keep them down a little bit. But back to Zirkzee, if I'm United, like you've already got a sunk cost. You don't really want him to just disappear immediately unless he's a horrible player in the dressing room, which we haven't seen anything like that. And he also has like some skill versatility in that he's a very large dude. Someone mentioned him as like a potential Joel Linton, where he could potentially be a little more versatile inside of the midfield and filling those roles as well. And versatility does have value. Like elite output has value, but having a squad that is somewhat limited, you've got some constraints around financial fair play stuff. Having a squad where some players are flexible and can play multiple positions is usually quite useful to you. So at this point, my take is keep him around. Don't ship him off to Juventus or wherever his agent's talking about, and see if he's good enough to play like a couple of roles at a decent level.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, like he's a decent passer. He can bring the ball down, turn and dribble. His dribbling's been reasonably, successful so far this season. I think he's got something like 3.8 expected goals and expected assists across 600 minutes, which is like very respectable. He's 23. He's adapting. Plus, I just think when you get a new manager in, I don't know why you would start making changes to the squad before you know exactly what you are going to need and how the manager kind of rates the players that you've got on hand. To me, it just feels like give it a little bit of time, let him work out who he likes and who he doesn't, and then maybe make your big moves.
I don't think this is United planted. I think this is his agent just making sure that they stoke the fires. One of the things you'll hear us talk about in the newsletter in particular is we'll flag up things that are pretty clearly agent related as opposed to club related or interest related or whatever. Zirkzee's agent is keeping the coals hot. And another player whose agent has been doing this for feels like a decade now is Victor Gyokeres, or however you would like to pronounce that better than me. And for those of you who hate my pronunciations on the podcast, I appreciate that. But it's extremely difficult to be vaguely knowledgeable about how everybody wants these things pronounced, which is me. So typically my pronunciations are going to be best endeavors, but also terrible. I had a journalist friend who I adore, but also speaks like 6 different languages, complain about my pronunciation of something vaguely Italian a week or 2 ago. And I was like, yeah, as soon as you learn Python and R, we can talk about my pronunciation in different languages, because I ended up being in the computer side of things and not so much the multilingual over here. It's shit. I know it. Get over it. Anyway, Victor Gyokeres, his agent has been shopping him, feels like nonstop, at every single team that he has been at. And so he is so loud in the news right now because his agent wants him to always be in front of it. And obviously, it's helpful when your player scores goals against Pep's Man City in Champions League. That's fine. But he was doing this at Coventry. It's not a new thing. And so when you see all this information, like just kind of filter it and be like, yeah, okay, this dude's always out there. Nothing's real until something actually happens. And nothing actually happened this summertime, did it? So I'm kind of those types of players. You're like, look, don't worry about it. He's probably irritating the club that he plays at and, and the people that run the club that he plays at. But other than that, Zirkzee, I don't think is going anywhere. Gyokeres isn't going anywhere until the summer. So, don't worry about that until then either.
No, I mean, I'm just looking forward to him moving, so I don't have to think about him anymore.
It'll happen again immediately. Like 6 months from his next place, it'll happen again. Zirkzee just moved. It's agents what they do.
But anytime you say anything critical about these players, as soon as they score a goal, then you get people saying to you like, "Look, he's really, really good. He scored a goal." And then after a few months when he doesn't score a goal, then everyone says, "Look, you were right. He's crap." And you think, oh, the answer is somewhere in between these things. I rarely think a player is total dog shit, and I rarely think a player is like an absolute can't miss, would be amazing anywhere in the world.
So I want to tell a story about this, and it's a historical story, and I'm going to protect the people who did it at the time. But there were 2 journalists who were Nottingham Forest fans, and they signed Daryl Murphy under Mark Warburton and Frank McParlin. And they signed him for a fee that was high enough. And I think they signed him at like age 34, maybe 35. I was like, this is a fireable offense. Like, there is absolutely no way that this guy should be signed at that amount. And I swear to God, these journalists at the time would message me every single time that he scored. And I was like, first of all, they signed him to like a 3-year deal at his age, which is one of the big problems. Second of all, like you probably could have gotten him for half the fee. There's no reason why any of that made sense. And he was doing an okay job. Like he was scoring like maybe 0.33 expected goals per game. But they would message me every time. And then the things that happened were, one, he completely fell off and he started to score something like 0.2 goals a game. His life fell apart because, like, knowing things behind the scene, that was part of the reason why things were fireable. And McParland and Warburton got fired. Never got a message of apology, never be like, okay, you got that one right, good job, nothing like that. Fans and journalists alike just seem to lose their heads about this. And the worst one that happened for me, which I disappeared a lot of my tweets, although you can find them in some analysis that I did on Arsenal back in the summer of, God, I don't remember when, was number 5. I was like, this was a horrific signing, 50 million pounds at a time when they weren't trying to win the league. His age wasn't right. His wages were huge. I don't think his wages have ever been properly reported, but what we heard from people in the know was they were massive. And I was like, I hate everything about this deal. And every single time they had a good game, I would just hear people chatting at me. And then everything else has happened, and we can't even really say his name because we're both in the UK and we're worried about super injunctions. But yeah, it's just we exist in this space. And Zirkzee actually surprised me. I thought that his stats would look worse than they currently do. And that's the thing about being an objective person that does this for a living, like being an analyst that looks at new data. You're like, oh, wow, he's done better than I thought he would. He's done better than the media has said that he is. And so anyway, I didn't hate the deal. I didn't really like the deal to start with. Now I'm like, there's enough there that you want to at least figure it out, let him play some more.
Yeah, I think when you've sunk this amount of money into Zirkzee and Højlund, you've got to roll with them for a while and see how it goes. And if you say crap, then that's also fun. Shall we look at Jeremie Frimpong, who is kind of an interesting name on the market right now as well. 23-year-old. He plays in a position of need for a few major teams, or does he play in a position of need for a few major teams? Because he's really a right wing back, but he's been linked to Real Madrid, to Liverpool, to Manchester City. He's got absolutely crazy goal and assist numbers. I think he's got 31 goals and assists in the Bundesliga over the last 2 full seasons. Last year, he was at close to 0.6 expected goals and assists per 90 minutes. So basically, you're getting good winger output from this guy who is a wing back. Ted, of these 3 teams he's linked to, is there one of them that stands out to you as a reasonable destination?
I mean, everything kind of depends on what Trent does, right? So if Trent decides to jump ship, which I don't think he will, but if he decides to jump ship, then Liverpool obviously have a need, and they have a need for an attacking right back, effectively. They also need a left back that can defend well and go forward a bit, which I think Robertson's sort of on his last legs. They need a really good apprentice for Robertson. But these were 2 positions that kind of carried them through the dominant Klopp era. So yes, obviously that makes sense. Frimpong's output's weird.
Yeah.
And I feel like he is the epitome of what Conte wanted Victor Moses to be at one point, right? The really high engine, great overlaps, great pace to get into the box, and then be able to do stuff while you congest the middle as well. So he's quite unusual in his profile. Where else do you think that he might go?
It was Real Madrid, Liverpool, Man City. Those are the links I've seen.
Yeah, so Man City, I think he doesn't naturally fit versus his positional element. I think that one is sort of the outlier. Real Madrid, we know, are looking for fullbacks. That's a thing that has been discussed, and so maybe there's a replacement effect there. Fonzo Davies is still rumored to be going there. I think he probably is likely to go there. I think he held out on signing anything from anybody else. And then the Trent question is there. I think Frimpong's super interesting and a bit unusual, and you have to be somewhat tactically flexible in order to figure out how to best fit him into your squad, unless you want to take away some of his attacking elements and make him just a little more robust on either side of it. I don't think his passing outside of the box is a Trent-esque, but very few people are, right? Trent has a wand of a foot that has really long passing length, which we don't usually see from a right back. You usually see that in defensive midfield or even as a center back. But no, I think he's super exciting. And actually, he's one of Archie Ryan-Tooth, who is an English journalist that covers the Bundesliga. It's one of his favorite interviews. He's great on camera.
Oh, interesting. I don't love his passing. I think he doesn't give you a great deal of progressive passing. He was creating some chances last season, but not a crazy number. But for passing, his passing accuracy was still very low relative to the rest of the team. I think he was second bottom last year. I think he's bottom of the squad this year among the regulars. Like, that's not necessarily a problem. Obviously, we don't put that much stock in passing accuracy, but if you're not attempting particularly hard passes and your pass accuracy isn't particularly high, I kind of think you're probably not for Manchester City. It'd be interesting for Liverpool, I guess, because if Trent goes and if Salah goes, they're
going to rebuild the whole right side.
Yeah, and one way to get to deal with the fact that whichever winger you get is not going to be as good as Mohamed Salah is to get kind of the off-ball running out of Frimpong, which is really how he creates, right? Like, he's a guy who pops up in the box. Last season, I think he was at something like 8 touches in the box per game, which is hilarious.
This is the thing, like the elements of his passing that you comment on are true, but it's also like an output or an effect of how much he runs, right?
Yeah.
He's constantly running, and maybe he's not as positionally comfortable when he has the ball at his feet. So yeah, you've got to figure out how to wrap your head around it. Maybe he just goes where Alonso goes.
And I think with Real Madrid, we've been talking about their left side bias all season, and getting somebody who can really give you width on that right-hand flank makes a lot of sense. When you can't get Achraf Hakimi, then an obvious guy to look at is Frimpong, because he is incredibly fast, hugely dangerous. Last season, his carry numbers were really, really great. Carries into the penalty area, really, really great. He's not super successful in the one-on-one. I don't really like his defending, but who knows? Maybe that's...
What if Real Madrid take both Trent and Salah? What if they decided to just be like, fuck it, we're going Galacticos, we're taking that right side, we're gonna balance out the left side with some oomph there. It's like a 2-year deal, right? But like they're one of the few teams that can afford it. I'm sorry, you just shut up for a second. You're just quiet.
It would be really good. It would be really good.
I didn't really put all that together, and then I was like, well, they're both kind of available.
Yeah, I would actually love to see that. But I mean, it's like if you were to sign Frimpong, you kind of really want to love your right-sided centre back, I think, or really love your DM's ability to cover that zone. Like, somebody there has got to be doing that, and you've got to trust them.
That's the position of weakness that Real Madrid kind of have at the moment. Is like a bit of sort of dynamic DM and a bit of, metronomic passing that just keeps everything ticking over in the right zones where like no one can really keep track of them because they're too dangerous everywhere. Right now they have a really weird attack. Their metrics look more like Atletico than they do like Real Madrid, which is very surprising. There was a rumor last week that says that Xabi Alonso has basically decided to go to Real Madrid. Now, we've seen these rumors be nonsense many, many different times out of there. Like, Carlo was supposed to go to Brazil, right? Or something like that. Like,
yeah, that never happened.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of things are never happening. And that's why we're here. But, it feels like Xabi's only going to stay through this year. He is one of the most notable names. Like, Liverpool are not going to replace Schlotz, especially if they win the league. So then it's either City, which they would have to retool. And there was a rumor this week that said that Pep is has agreed to terms on a 1-year contract extension. That, again, haven't seen that actually be official, so we don't think anything. But it's either Manchester City or Real Madrid. He doesn't need to go anywhere lesser. In the meantime, Leverkusen's fine.
Yeah, and I just think that I'm still expecting that something's going to happen with Manchester City in the middle of this season that is going to make it a considerably less attractive prospect for people going forward.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, like Jeremie Frimpong.
Good one. Absolutely disgraceful segue. No, I enjoyed it. Okay, I actually need to come up with a disgraceful segue of my own. I don't know. Seeing as we're talking about Xabi Alonso, shall we stick with a Spanish midfielder from San Sebastian? Because Zubimendi is back in the news again. This is kind of the opposite of Gyokeres in that he's in the news all the time, but I don't think he really wants to because I don't think he wants to move.
Exactly. This is a repeatable thing that's fascinating. Basque people fucking love Basque country, and they don't want to move.
Fair enough.
It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Like Bilbao and San Sebastian are basically my favorite place in the world to eat. And then also, like, when it's not wintertime, like pretty much one of my favorite places in the world to be. but yes, like we see these stars come out of that area, or at least rumored, and it's almost like somebody has to push them in order to get them to do an actual a move away from there. Zubimendi, it was felt like he just didn't move in the summer because he didn't feel like it. He wanted to stay at home. He loves the area, and the problem at the moment is like there are a couple teams that are desperate for a midfielder of his type. He's probably done as much as he can at Sociedad at this point. Like they're going to have ups and downs. They're sort of a cyclical team. And so he has to make the choice. Like, is he going to move now or is he just going to not move? And is he going to move in January or not? And I don't have a good answer for it. But I think the important thing to realize here is that, as you say, his name is being pushed, but not necessarily by himself. And the other side of it is the teams that are looking will look at a lot of players that are hopefully the equivalent or better of him.
Yeah, okay. So Manchester City are obviously linked with him now. Arsenal have been interested in the past. Liverpool been interested in the past. Maybe Liverpool go back into the market if they think, right, okay, you know, we've actually got a chance to like lock down a title here. Maybe should do it. I'm not sure that, given they've already had this conversation with Zubimendi, you'd imagine that they go to whoever's second on the list rather than going back for him. For Manchester City, we're putting a lot of stock here in the size of the dump truck that they'll put up and how much money can fit in it, and also the Pep factor. Because Liverpool were offering, I imagine, a huge ton of money and a very prestigious club. I don't know. I'm just not sure that I really buy that he changes his mind, at least in the middle of the season.
Hard to say on that element. Like, you never know. Maybe he felt regret about not moving in the summer, and that would be something that sort of triggers it. But otherwise, I think your read's probably correct. One of our readers sent me an email in reply to today's column. He basically said, how much would Manchester City have to pay to get Baleba to go into the center of the midfield? I was like, ooh, that's a really good question. I love that. Like, first of all, the move is awesome, right? Like maybe his passing isn't as Pep-like yet, but he's so young, and every other element that he has, like you're like, oh, he could anchor that midfield for a decade, right? And that's really what you're looking for if you're having to spend that amount of money. The other answer is potentially Enzo. Like, get Enzo out of Chelsea.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, Enzo's not very good right now. Well, Enzo was great over there. Right? He hasn't made an impact over here, but partly because like Maresca's system doesn't allow it. But then you're like, well, maybe Maresca's system is enough like Pep's that they don't want that. I don't know. What's your price for Baleba in January?
Oh my god! Like Scrooge McDuck money. I think that's a there's definitely a 9-figure ask. I think that Brighton would be happy with that if they got 100.
I think it's 125 to 150.
Really?
I think that's the number. Like, because first of all, they love him and they think that they can get into the Champions League with him. And so if he's part of that core that they view for the future, like you've got to give them basically like 3 bullets that they can fire worth of potential other players. So they're spending sort of Matt's V for money. So yeah, I think it's like 120 to 150 that the charge would be. I think Enzo is going to be more like 70, maybe 60. Like it'll be a high number, but it won't be Baleba numbers.
I think that somebody will have done the maths on this, on how much kind of unamortized like value is left on that contract, but it's got to be 80, 90. It's kind of the same thing as we'll come on to him in a bit. And Nkunku, I don't know, who else would you be interested in? So Enzo's quite an interesting name. I mean, if he were fitter, I think Palacios from Leverkusen would be a really nice Rodri type guy. Huge defensive output, but his passing's excellent. He's his dribbling as well. I think Rodri over the last couple of seasons has quietly just increased his dribbling bit by bit. And Palacios is kind of over a dribble game, like 90% success. Like you're going to struggle to get the ball off him. It just feels like he'd be an interesting guy, but he's going to cost you an arm and a leg, and he's going to be missing an arm and a leg. You just can never get him. I think he's got like, I don't know how exact these are, but I think it was something like 20 90s last season. It was like 18 90s the season before. And he was a guy who, when he first went to Leverkusen, I remember that first season, he got like 600 minutes or something. And I looked at what he'd done in those minutes and I thought, oh, this is a guy to keep an eye on. And he's looked every bit as good as he looked in those minutes, but he just doesn't play enough. So if money were no object, injury no object, then maybe he'd be my pick. But it's a tough position to recruit for.
Yeah, and I think City are very aware of that. City are aware of not bringing on more older, potentially injured players. Like they know that they, unless they had like they had a whole retool where like the squad was like robust and rarely gets injured. Like they're conscious of that problem. So I don't know where they'll go. I'm sure that we'll talk about a variety of different targets as we go forward, but I thought that one was interesting and unknown. And then the the potential for them to get either the hottest young midfielder in the Premier League in sort of a defensive all-around player, or to pick up some of Chelsea's scraps because there's a constant outflow of things from Chelsea that needs to happen anyway is useful.
On the topic of the outflow from Chelsea, do you want to talk about Nkunku, who's now linked with Man United?
Productivity is not Nkunku's problem. And I think that people should be aware of that. Like the only reason he's not playing right now is because Nico Jackson has exploded, right? And he's been awesome. And Nkunku's been perfectly fine coming on later in games. He's not getting as much playing time. He would like to be a full-time starter right now. And his agent is aware that he just turned 27. And he's probably got like one more big move / one more big contract in his lifespan, his football lifespan. And so like now's a decent time, right? He hasn't completely fallen off. Like people are still aware of him and his output's pretty good. The second issue is like, how often is he actually going to play and be healthy for you? And that, as you mentioned with another player briefly with Palacios, like if you're looking at 20 or 2290s, like, is that enough to make a big move? But also knowing that Chelsea might be sellers and sort of somewhat aggressively sending out players that don't fit, that also have big wage packages, maybe there's a deal to be done. And I think that is something that teams are very aware of right now. Like they don't mind if Chelsea just hemorrhage money because they've made really dumb deals. But if there's a deal to be done and they can find some players they actually quite like that can fit roles that they need, they'll get into it.
And Chelsea, because of these long deals that Chelsea have done, obviously it means that Chelsea pay off a smaller amount of their transfer fees each season, right? So he came for 52 mil. He came on a 6-year deal. I think Chelsea have got about 39 mil left on him in January. So that's probably around the point that they're looking for. They want their money back. Maybe you can get him for a little bit less than that if he's only going to be playing Europa minutes or Conference League minutes rather. But he's as a versatile connecting type forward, he is pretty phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, that early stage of his career where he was at something like 3.5 key passes a game, and then later on he was up to 3.5 shots per game and still retaining some creative ability. He's always been an excellent dribbler. He gets fouled a lot. I mean, I love the player.
Fantasy people love the player too. Like fantasy people are just like, please play him. He's so good, and he puts up so many different stats when he plays, and that isn't happening right now. But I agree with all of that, and I've always liked him as a player. Man, I remember watching him when he was young at PSG. Yeah, and you're like, ooh, he's spicy. And now it seems like PSG have finally figured out that they have spicy kids come out of the academy all the time. Where to loan them out is a question. They've turned that into like a decent profit center for themselves, because Paris is the epicenter of like the best recruitment catchment area in the world. Yeah, I don't know where he's going to go, but I think that it kind of makes sense. And I think that he's desperate to sort of play full time, which is a big deal. Now, maybe Chelsea don't want to do that because they are happy with their current path and they're going to get back in the Champions League probably. And it's a very competitive league, so they don't want to make anybody else better, which I think is but United are bad enough that it doesn't quite matter. So maybe there's a loan in his future with an obligation to buy.
You might want to check how bad United still are in January, and then if they're still crap, you're like, okay, you can have some of our offcuts. That's totally fine. Okay, where do you want to go next? We've got a few guys. We've got a Premier League centre back linked with Real Madrid.
I think that one is a little bit agent based and a little bit, and it's not exciting. Like people are like, oh, whatever. It's a Nottingham Forest center back. Like center backs are not sexy unless they're Gerard Piqué. But Murillo is mentioned as a potential target. Forest have been great. They've been outperforming. People are going to look at that Forest team and be like, "Ooh, who are the actual talents that we should be able to take, because they shouldn't be in the Champions League positions." I think the one that you're most excited by is probably the one that we should talk about, though. The one that you're like, ooh, that's a really good target that I'm interested in as an Arsenal fan, but also as a fan of other things.
I have literally no idea who you're talking about, Ted. I'm going down my...
Mohammed Kudus.
Oh, yeah, boy. Okay. Well, it's because I'm not necessarily excited about it as an Arsenal fan. I'm excited about it as a fan of good players not playing for teams that have their shoes tied together. I love Mohammed Kudus, and I think kind of everyone loves him, though his numbers haven't been like sensational or anything. But he's been playing for a miserable West Ham side since he arrived. He had 14 goal involvements last season, which was a pretty significant overperformance. I think he was at like something like 9 expected goals and assists. But now he's linked with Arsenal. Has he been linked with somebody else? I feel like the only one I've really heard is Arsenal, and apparently they want their 85 mil for him.
Exactly. So this one feels like West Ham would like to get some money back, and they're like, oh, we're gonna stick to our 85 million release clause, which I can fucking guarantee you is not gonna happen based off of his performance for the last couple of years. It's a bit like Napoli trying to stick to their Osimhen. He's gonna go for over 100 million, and everybody just laughed at them, because there's no possible way that made sense. Even if you liked Osimhen, you're just like, no one is looking at his trajectory at the moment in Italy and thinking that that's a good one. So Kudus is versatile, I think is the first way to do it, right? So he kind of plays all across the front line. He's not really a true center forward. He had a great season at Ajax. He came out of Nordsjælland and also was very good. But he's also had some like ups and downs, right? And he doesn't look out of place in the Premier League, which I think is always the first thing that people look at. Like high dribble volume last year, decent creativity, moderate shots, but shot quality was bad. And that's more of a West Ham characteristic, because shot quality was good at Ajax. This year, shot volume has gone up a bit. I think he's up over like 3.
He is,
but he's chucking it, and he's chucking it from all over the place. And I mean, that team is like a mess. So what are you trying to judge out of that? The talent is there. The question is really, what would you pay in order to take him out of the morass of West Ham and bring him somewhere else? And that's a really tough question right now, because of the complexity of how do you evaluate that? And also, like, Ajax often have soft and squishy competition. So like, he's doing fine over here, but is he going to be great somewhere? Like, because great 85 million means you have to be one of the top 25 attackers in the world.
Yeah.
Is he 45? Is he 50? Are they going to get their money back? I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with it. I think there's a lot of risk.
I think that's true. I think 45-50 is probably where the biting point is. I mean, it feels a little bit like West Ham were thinking that they were going to get this huge Paquetá sale, and now instead, like, Paquetá is unsellable and is at the end of the season going to head off to the gulag forever. So they need to turn somebody else into money. I don't know. Like, Kudus, he dribbles a lot. He gets fouled a lot. You know, he's pretty versatile. So I guess that's helpful for you. I don't know. Like, if you're Arsenal, you can absolutely see how he can cover a load of positions, but he's nowhere near worth 80 mil to you. It's just ludicrous. I mean, if Liverpool said, we're going to get this guy and he's going to start on the right wing for us, and we really believe he could be great, then I would kind of love that. Though I guess I would be factoring in there the fact that my faith in Liverpool's recruitment team would make me think, okay, they've done their due diligence on this.
Yeah, you have to do it in the absence of that, Patrick. Yeah. You don't get to like
actually I don't
off the back.
Technically I don't. I can just like Monday morning quarterback this the whole time. But I don't know. I love the player. I do think he's playing for a crappy side. I do think he would be great
at United. Like that's the place where he should have ended up, right? And they need somebody on that side that is competent. They've spent so much money in not having competent players over there. And maybe that'll be like a rumor that happens. Look, I think that he's a good player. So we're talking at numbers that say this is a very good player. Certainly, I would happily take Kudus over Pedro Neto. I think that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of, you know, comps, like a player that plays more, a player that you know, doesn't have reconstructive knee surgery that has endangered his career, but is doing fine at the moment creatively. So I think that he's very good. I think that he will possibly go somewhere should West Ham need to get out of some spend. But they could also be in a relegation fight. So like they might actually need to stick until the end of the season to not lose one of their weapons.
Yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere in January. I don't think anybody's paying the money it would take.
No one's paying 85 million.
No, that's absolutely crazy. Okay, we've got a couple more forwards who we wanted to cover. What do you think about Omorodion? Obviously, we talked about him a bit in the summer. I think Kim has really been like the chief Omorodion fan in our Slack, and now he's linked to Barcelona as a potential heir to Lewandowski, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, he's 20 years old. I think he's got 12 in 12 across the league and Europa for Porto so far this season. I mean, it's going about as well as it could.
When Chelsea were playing Pokemon this summer and scooping up all of the young players they could add to their trainer, hoping that they could get like all the best of them and create a shortage of supply, they did not, in fact, catch them all. And
No.
this was one that escaped. And his rumored price was about 30 million in the summertime. Now you look at him, and you're like, that's a 70 million pound price. He's like,
Yeah.
ooh. Assuming that the price is a little less expensive than that, yeah, he's excellent and he fits all the bills that everyone's looking for. It would make sense for Barcelona to grab him, and whether they possibly can, are they out of levers? Possibly, who knows? Do they really want to irritate Lewandowski? On the other hand, maybe Lewandowski wants a break. you never quite know. There are times that the older players are like, look, I'm all right. You can bring in like somebody that competes with. It's okay. I'm tired. Yeah, I really like him. Ravi, who obviously is on the Wednesday pods, has basically been following his every move during the season as well. So very good. Full featured, scoring buckets at Porto. Does that fully translate one place or another? I don't know, but he's 20 years old and he's lighting up Europe. So like, I don't have a lot of questions about his risk. He looks awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where we've been quite cagey about Gyokeres playing in the Portuguese league, and Omorodion. I guess you can make the same criticism, I suppose. But last season, he was playing for Alaves, who were dead middle of the league, and put up real numbers. I mean, he was at like 0.6 expected goals and assists per 90 in 1,800 minutes at 20 in La Liga. And then you look at his kind of XG per shot, and it's really, really high in Portugal right now. But it was also really high in Spain. So you think, okay, this is interesting.
One of your jobs as a data analyst is to look for things that don't fit, to look for things that have risk profiles that you can't quite figure out, and you won't actually be able to figure them out. Like the whole thing is a game of incomplete information. And if you play poker, that's an incomplete information game. If you gamble on sports, that's an incomplete information game. If you do transfers, that is an incomplete information game. And that's one reason why like being a professional sports bettor translated really well to being somebody who worked in recruitment and still does that. And we actually blend it in our content because of my expertise, but also because it's interesting and it's fun. It's not too dissimilar in what you're trying to figure out. So with Samu, you're like, actually everything kind of adds up. Nothing feels weird about this. And as long as like he's like a decent kid in the background, you're like, yeah, I think anybody can buy him at this point and have as decent confidence that he's going to work out as you can based off of what we know from his early career.
Yeah, Atleti letting him go this summer and not for a big fee is a very, very strange one.
It's not the first time they've done weird stuff. Like Atleti are always attached to agents that have agendas that need to do things. And in this case, maybe that was something that's there. Sometimes they bring in players for like fees that make zero sense, and then that's a future favor that happens. Omorodion clearly though is one where they probably needed the cash flow in order to execute. Sure. He was their best available. It basically think of it as a PSR sale, and that would probably like clock up as, oh, I understand this because lots of other teams have had to do this too.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. It'd be interesting to know whether they have any kind of buyback, like they might do. That would kind of make things interesting.
Or sell on clause. That's most common.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've gone through most of our names, but I thought that before we go, I just wanted to hear you alienate yourself from all your fellow Americans with your Pepi take.
See, I think U.S. men's national team is not over on blue sky right now. They haven't fully transitioned, partly because some of those people are crazy enough to be part of the mainstays of Twitter. But I think that Ricardo Pepi is not super exciting. And I think that he's 21 years old, but he can't lock down a starting spot at PSV. He's been there for a while. Like, he's fine, but he's the type of kid where, like, you need more proof in order to jump in with both feet and expect that he's the future starter for your as a center forward. If you're not lighting it up in the Dutch league, then you're probably not awesome. And that's kind of my perspective at the moment. Now, that's not to say that he won't switch, because he's still young. Like, 21's young. So he could do that, but he was a rumored name, and I felt like that was also his agent being like, okay, he's not getting starts in front of Luke de Jong, who's, he's a big, strong, very talented forward, but yeah, the 21-year-old is just like, hey, I got to play somewhere. And so I think that one is a little early for anybody to jump in and be interested.
Well, and I don't know, if you're an agent and you're trying to gin up interest in him, maybe don't try and link him with Liverpool and Bayern Munich, which is extremely implausible.
Maybe it worked for Jalen Fidejian's agent, though, and so they're working off of that playbook.
Yeah,
just show up at Barcelona and knock on the door. Hey.
And Pepi kind of does have a history of insanity. I mean, like that move to Augsburg when he was 18, wasn't that was like 20 mil or something, absolutely insane after a good season for a teenager at Dallas. And then he's kind of bounced around the Netherlands, and now he doesn't play very much. But,
didn't Barcelona move for Serginho Dest at one point too? So they have history of grabbing young American national team players from the Dutch league. Maybe it all adds up, and we just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, that's what it is. We only play chess in 3 dimensions. Okay, is there anything else that you want to hit before we're out of here, Ted?
I would like to say that your hair styling is, high and tight. Lovely.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Finally, that's what I'm here for. I can't believe we had to sit through 45 minutes of this bullshit before we got to the actual content.
Me, I'm sporting all the salt and pepper here. Speaking of content, so on Wednesday, I'm going to produce something that's been asked for by pretty much everybody to go out on the free side of the newsletter, which is basically talking about where people should potentially be betting if they wanted to be involved in the discount booking concept that we've explained on Variance Betting. Or just follow along with the lines that we've been doing. If you're not interested in the gambling content, that's fine, but usually people have to pay for it. So there's pretty exciting value there. Also, we're coming into Thanksgiving period, and we actually take holidays at this content factory. So we are completely off the week between Christmas and New Year's. And that's something that I believe strongly in. And I will be a bit touch and go, and Kim may be a bit touch and go in and amongst that. So if you feel like, oh my God, they're not producing the podcast, get back in the studio, guys. Well, it's holiday time, and give us a little break, because we're going to be too full of turkey in order to actually wake up and record.
Yep. And of course, we're going to be more active on Blue Sky going forward as well. Like, it does feel like most of the football world has kind of moved over there now, or is in the process of moving over. So do give us a follow there if you've already made the switch yourself. Make sure that you give us a like and subscribe here if you enjoy the video on YouTube, or drop us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Make sure that you're signed up to the newsletter. The newsletter is now going to be motoring here to the new year. There's going to be team analysis. There's going to be manager talk. There's going to be transfers coming in as well. It's going to be Ted and Kim just leaving bloody fingerprints all over their keyboards between now and the new year.
We say nice things about people too, though. Like, it's not just us taking other people's blood and writing it into the
Sure. But I mean, it's a matter of time. Look, the more successful this podcast is, the more likely we are to get our little Peter Thiel, like blood boys who can pump their young blood into us. Turn that beard dark again, Ted.
That's the best moment to end on. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Show your love to Patrick in the comments. He's never going away.
Bye-bye.